Almost all internal policies of the EU also have in one or another way an external dimension. In Chapter 9 we discuss 3 of these internal policy fields: energy, environment and climate change, and the field of freedom, security and justice, including migration and asylum. We analyze in this chapter how the EU's external activities in these policy fields have grown over time, how these activities have had an increasingly important impact on the EU's foreign policy, and also how interests and objectives in these internal policy fields sometimes overshadow traditional foreign policy objectives such as democracy promotion, human rights promotion, or conflict prevention.
Interestingly, in most of the internal policy fields that we discuss in the book, it was primarily the European Commission that recognized the external challenges related to these internal policy fields and that designed long-term comprehensive policy programs and strategies to tackle these challenges and to promote a common European interest. However, in many of these fields, such as energy or migration, but with a notable exception of environmental policy, member states have only reluctantly accepted the formulation of common foreign policies and the operational involvement of supranational actors. This may be understandable from the member states' perspective, but it is actually paradoxical in the view of the limited ability of individual states to tackle the inherently transnational risks and challenges in these fields.
A recurrent theme in Chapter 9 is the blurring inside-outside divide. The difference between internal policies and external policies is indeed not always that clear. The EU's policy towards external actors is to a large extent shaped by the EU's needs in the various internal policies. 2 examples: the EU's relations with Turkey or Tunisia are shaped by the EU's dependency on these countries for tackling the migration and refugee crisis. And its relations with the Gulf states or Kazakhstan or Algeria are shaped by the EU's dependency on energy supply. And we see in this context also a blurring of the traditional picture of the foreign policy actors within the EU. Characteristic of each of these policy fields is that other institutional actors emerge than those traditionally associated with foreign policy. Not only the High Representative of the European External Action Service, but rather commissioners, directorates general or council constellations responsible for justice, environment or energy are becoming key players.
The EU not only conducts external relations in these fields, but it also externalizes its internal policies and regulatory standards to actors outside the EU. Externalization implies that the standards applicable within the European Union are also followed by actors abroad. In Chapter 9, we discuss 2 conceptual angles that might help to understand the externalization of internal policies to third countries. Market Power Europe, as has been developed by Tom Delreux, and the Brussels effect by Anu Bradford. Delreux argues that the EU's identity in international affairs can be considered as Market Power Europe. The EU's market power is based on 3 features: market size, institutions that provide regulatory capacity, and interest constellations within the European Union that push for the externalization of internal policies. Being a market power enables the European Union to externalize some of its internal policies which are directly or indirectly related to its internal market. Interesting in Anu Bradford's concept of the Brussels effect is that it alludes to a process of externalization that occurs unintentionally. The EU standards become global standards because private corporations in third countries that operate at the global level and in the global market are incentivized to adhere to them. Via the notion of the Brussels effect, it becomes clear that the EU externalizes its standards not only deliberately via positive and negative conditionality in bilateral agreements or via its influence in international negotiations or in international organizations, which are analyzed in chapters 8 and 12 of the book, but also unintentionally.